So my name's Sophie. This is Stuart.
Hello.
We adopted about 5 years ago, just over 5 years ago now. And our reason for adopting was because we have a birth child already, but he was born through IVF, and we definitely knew we weren't going to go through a second cycle. And adoption has never been a strange thing for us. My dad is adopted, and Stuart's sister is adopted as well. So adoption has always been part of our family and always something that's been just quite normal for us, really. So it felt like a very natural, very logical, very straightforward thing for us to do. And we talked about it with our birth son, and he was really up for the idea. And yeah, and that's how it all started, really.
Although actually at the very beginning, it wasn't a sort of life goal, if you like. We didn't kind of decide that we were going to have 2 children. We had a brochure that came through about adoption, and I remember we just sat around and we looked at that brochure. I think it was just a circular mail shop type thing, and I think I said to Soph one day, we could probably do that, couldn't we? And it was quite a relaxed decision at the very outset. And then we discussed it a little bit and then investigated it, and then obviously followed it through. And then it actually, we were very lucky. It actually went full, we completed the process. So.
I think adoption and going through IVF actually have quite a lot of parallels. Sort of you hear people complaining about the length of the adoption process and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, if you've gone through a process of IVF, we'd been trying for a child for 4 years before we even got referred for IVF. So actually, the length of that process from start to finish, and we were super lucky. We got pregnant with Noah first time. But that would have been nearly 6 years, start to finish. And our adoption process was probably start to finish of getting Riley, about 2.5 maybe.
Yeah.
3 years probably from the very first information point to official, court order, signing him off and him becoming part of our family forever. Actually in terms of emotions, both incredibly emotional experiences to go through, both very difficult, very challenging, but in very different ways. But yeah, in terms of the length of time, I'd rather they did the process right for adoption and that we were matched with the right kid, and that kid we were the right family for that child. The fact it takes some time wasn't really an issue for us, because we'd been through the IVF before.
It's a real character test, I think. But in some ways, I wouldn't really ever change that. I was chatting to somebody about it the other day. He just happened to say that he'd gone through IVF with his partner, and I sort of mentioned about the IVF and mentioned about the adoption. I said, actually, I wouldn't really change any of them, because I think they've really given me some character building qualities. They also allow me to empathise with other people that have been through the process, that I speak to socially or at work. So you do learn a lot from them. And I think Sophie's right. I think if it's done right, that's a crucial factor. So, we were very lucky with, in our experience with the child that we were matched with, even with the social workers that we had in a majority of cases. It was all, yeah.
I think, knowing how challenging the adoption process is in terms of, the depth that the assessment process goes into, and the testing of your relationship and the involvement of your family and your support networks and all of that kind of stuff. I think for people that have been through IVF, your relationships have already been tested. Your family know far more about you than probably most other people, and actually, if you can get through that, the adoption is just another variation on a theme, really. But yeah, it definitely, if you can get through IVF and your relationship survives, you'll get through adoption and your relationship will survive.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes there is a sense of, you flick through a magazine, or, now it would probably all be online, but you scroll through pictures online and you see a kid that you think, oh, they look nice, they sound great in their pen picture, and suddenly you're connected, and it's all straightforward and lovely. And I think what we found quite difficult, certainly I think I found it much more difficult than you at the beginning, was how negative some of the adoption process is. And I do get the need to do that, because obviously you need to give people worst case scenario stuff, but that was a real shock for us in terms of what you kind of go into the process expecting might happen versus the reality of what happened. And certainly at the beginning of the process, I found that really, really difficult, because it was quite doom and gloom, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think they set a very realistic expectation, but I think that's completely for the right reasons. Just making sure that you understand that there's a lot of unknown variables when you go into adoption, and I suppose they're giving you worst case scenarios, but you might not ever see any of the things that that could potentially happen. So I think they're just opening your eyes up to all the possibilities. And I think even just going into parenting, you could probably experience, there's a lot of unknown variables. You can kind of say, well, that child's got my genetics, and their history, so that there is that assurity. But I'm sure there's lots of families that hit unknown issues along the way, through their child's development, and are suddenly faced with the situation of having to deal with that, or the challenges of having to deal with that. So so I think I suppose, if you're a parent already, you might nod at some of those things, but if it's first time parenting, you might sort of think, oh yikes, there is a lot of things to consider here.
With a birth child, you would be reading all the books, you'd be reading all the manuals. Certainly for your first child, you probably don't bother for your second or third, but first child, you would be doing everything by the book. And I think that would be my piece of advice to any prospective adopters, is do your research. That you will be given a reading list, you'll be recommended loads of courses, do them all, become an adoption sponge, because don't assume, if you've got birth children already, don't assume that you've got the whole parenting thing nailed, because our boys are so different. Our parenting approach is similar, because I think we had a fairly therapeutic approach before, but knowing what we know from having done all our adoption training and study and keeping up to date, and still now, keep up to date with the latest thinking on, things like growth mindset or whatever it might be. You need that stuff in your armory, and that would be sort of one of my bits of advice is, take whatever training and advice is offered, and go into it with an open mind, not thinking that how all this parenting stuff works, because it is different. So that would be my.
And even if you, I think this goes back to like the adoption process itself. It's lengthy and it's challenging, and I think some of the reading you might look at something and you might think, I don't really like that model, or I feel quite disconnected from that approach or that idea. But and this has happened to me, you'll be going along and you'll be faced with a situation, and then you think, this, my current approach isn't quite ideal. It's not working. The response I'm getting isn't what I would hope for. And then suddenly you start trying to adopt some of those things because you're aware of them, and it's not your default approach, but you find they work. And that's, so again, I think, like Sophie said, absorb as much of that information as you can, because you can keep all that bits of information in the toolbox, and then suddenly you might have to pull that bit of information out. And you might go, oh, actually, that's working quite well. Let's roll with that and see how we get on.
When I had my birth child, people were kind of interested, but, not that bothered, because obviously lots of people get pregnant and have babies and stuff. But when we were walking around with Riley, people would literally burst into tears because they were so pleased for us. And we probably got more cards and presents from people that we barely knew even, because it just had a really different impact on people, I think. And, you know, you still get people that are, oh, you're amazing, what you've done is amazing. And we kind of don't really feel like that, because that's, you know, we didn't go into it from a sort of entirely altruistic point of view. But yeah, that really surprised me. Yeah, that was, and it does, you know, it seems to trigger a very different response in people to just having a normal pregnancy and birth child. And it might be a bit polarized, because you would get people who would normally speak to you who didn't speak to you, you know, and I don't think it was that they disliked the idea, they just probably couldn't relate to it easily, so it made them feel a bit weird. I don't know what to say, or I don't know what to do. So there was a bit of a division, but mostly, I mean, 80%, 90% was, as Sophie described, you know, quite overwhelming. Oh my God, that's amazing kind of response. And it was, you know, it was amazing. You know, it was, to get through it and be, get to the point where you've adopted a child and life is moving on and you're happy, and it's working out. You know, it's great. So. Yeah. I have a group of other adoptive mums that I meet up with on a regular basis, not through our own sort of adoption experience, but because where we live seems to be a hub of adopters. So one has adopted from abroad, one has adopted 2 different children, one has adopted a much more complex child, but we get together on sort of, you know, every 3 months, maybe something like that, go to the pub for a drink and a download. And that's brilliant, because all of our experiences are so different. Our children are all different ages, our backgrounds and our children's backgrounds are all really different. But that sort of informal network has been really, really helpful, because you can use a shared language that people who haven't adopted don't really understand. So you can talk about children who've experienced trauma, you can talk about sort of pre-birth experiences, and people not go, yeah, but you've had them since they were a baby, so they'll be fine. That kind of thing. And also it's just a really useful place to just vent and you know, yes, you can see potentially what the future might hold, but you can also see people coming out the other side of difficult times. Like a few of them have got teenagers, and you know, that seems to be a bit of a pivotal turning point and those kinds of things. So definitely having that sort of informal network for me has been really, really useful. Yeah. I think there was a couple of points over the last couple of years where there was stuff going on where we thought we weren't quite sure whether we were on top of it, or, you know, had a good grasp on how to deal with certain things. So I remember there were 1 or 2 things where I think I said, I wonder if we do need to get some help with that. But by the time you've acknowledged it, kind of thought about it for a few weeks and thought, oh, I wonder where we need to go with this. Can we problem solve it ourselves? Generally, we had come out the other end of that, touch wood. So I suppose, like with all parenting, you just have to be adaptable, and you don't know what the next curveball is that's going to be thrown at you. And touch wood, up until now we've been able to work most things out. We're kind of anticipating a storm at some point. You know, we keep saying, oh, I wonder, you know, whether we'll get through the next 12 months without, you know, a major hurdle. I suppose the difficulty is, you know, knowing that your child is going to get older and they're going to start to ask questions or direct questions towards you. Although we have taken the policy of being very open from day one, and we do actively refer back to, early childhood. So we say, well, when you were with the foster parents, they used to do this with you. And we were sat around the table the other day chatting about Riley had to take a photo of when he was a baby into school. And that was quite a nice cue to kind of talk about that, you know, the fact that he wasn't with us when that photo was taken. At least I don't think no, he was. That was our first week of introductions. Yeah.
Although we sort of mentioned that, you know, it was around the time where he was being adopted by us. So it was a good chance to go over that. And because we're really open to learning and doing new stuff and trying new stuff,
we were happy to kind of experiment, weren't we, a little bit with some of the techniques or strategies or theories that we'd been sort of taught through our training and our sort of, you know, contacting sort of my other friends and things. So that was really helpful. But also we've been really lucky with our nursery and with our school as well. Partly because of where we live, lots of people have adopted. So there is a real knowledge of adoption and some of the associated issues in our sort of local school. And so, you know, we've had really good support with that. I know that's an area where lots of people don't feel like they have support, but we've been really, really lucky.
And also we've got good family support. We've got Sophie's mum locally and my parents locally, so that makes a big difference.
For me, there's something about that peer support where people really do have that shared language and that shared understanding of, you know, current thinking and current approaches. And, you know, I suspect had your parents been going through that process now, they'd probably do some stuff differently. So again, it's not everyone gets it when you're talking about your current approach or why you might be parenting in a different way to how you parent another child, or, you know, so yeah, the support is really important to enable you to talk freely and easily to people who get it. There is a lot of self-reflection that goes on in that initial assessment process, and I know that's the part that a lot of people find really intrusive and really unnecessary. But I think Stu's absolutely right. If emotionally and practically you aren't in a position really to sort of manage yourself, and your emotions and your lifestyle, there is no way you're going to be able to offer a stable and secure and effective home environment, is there? So, and that's not to say that those people wouldn't be able to be effective adopters at some point in the future, but it's very much, you've got to be emotionally resilient, and there has to be a level of practicality that comes into it. You know, if you're working 60 hours a week, you're not going to be at home, you're not going to be around for when that child needs you. And sometimes that acknowledging that is a bit tough for people. But again, I think that's why the process is important, because without that process and without testing people, you don't necessarily get the right people taking on these children. And these children need stability, they need security. And yeah. You can write, you know, education plan when at the start of each term or whatever it might be, but actually if your school hasn't got the resources to enact that plan, then it doesn't get followed. You know, and so things like, yeah, and it's even down to really sort of silly things like, you know, the baby photos. Our child's teacher knows that he's adopted, but you know that those sort of activities that children are asked to do are going to have some sort of impact. Our oldest, you know, in his class, one of the activities that they were doing was compare what you look like to what your parents look like, because they were doing about genetics. So again, straight away that raises the issue in the home of, well, actually, one of our sons doesn't have any of our genetics. So then it's trying to work a positive thing around that about, well, what are your learned characteristics that you've taken on? But again, I think sometimes schools just forget about the impact of that, that it may not be just to do with that child, but it might be a sibling of that child in the school environment that leads you to having unplanned conversations around adoption and the impacts of that at a time when you hadn't necessarily thought about it.
Although we don't know that for sure, because it might be that when Riley gets to that point, they may give us a heads up and say, by the way, this activity is coming up. We'd like to tell you, so would you like Riley to be present for the whole of that, you know, learning experience? Or, you know, is there some, you know, preemptive conversation that you need to have there? So they might do that.
They might, but my point was, it's not just about that child. There's other stuff that can happen in a school environment that you aren't necessarily aware of or that you haven't planned, and you have to then be able to respond to it. You know, and
like you, I clocked that and thought, how are we going to deal with that when that comes up? and you start thinking about it and
Yeah.
preempting it.
Yeah, definitely. And we've got a very open relationship with the school and a very positive relationship with the school. So, you know, for us personally, I don't think it will be an issue. But I know that if my child's needs weren't being met at school, I would be in there and I would be being a bit of a tiger mother and, you know, wanting to make sure that that support was there. As I say, luckily, the support plans have been followed and those kinds of things. But
you kind of need to know when to ask for help. So some, you know, you sort of, perhaps you, like a lot of things, you know, you get knee deep into it and you go, oh yeah, so I'm really stuck now and I don't know how to get out of this. So I think it's, you know, like I said, there's been a couple of times where we've kind of thought, we could call somebody in to help with, you know, elements of that behaviour. But like I say, not got there. But I suppose it's just being mind open to the fact that you might need that, and then perhaps sticking your hand up at the right time and knowing when to go in to speak to the teachers.
And we've been really lucky as well, because they have what's called an ELSA program at our school. So our son's done that. It's an emotional sort of wellbeing program where they have to do it on a one-to-one basis or with a small group of other children. And that's been really nice. That's been really positive. And they also offer a Thrive assessment as well. So again, we had a very specific action plan to tackle some of our son's specific needs. So that again created a good relationship sort of there as well. They were school were definitely open to trying to identify where help could be provided. And as I say, our sort of support was very low resource. I think the challenges in mainstream school for the kids that need much more intensive support.
I think another thing I noticed, and this just goes for parents across the board generally, is that there are, you know, as there is with all parents in every school, there are some parents that just will go in and you know, right, give the teachers, you know, tell them what's what, and you're not doing this and you're not doing that, and rant on social media and all that sort of stuff. That won't help you, obviously, clearly. So, you know, you need to kind of think, okay, what do I need to get out of this? How can we achieve this in the most, I don't know, least, you know, least sort of intrusive way, and you know, and just keep the focus of what it is you're trying to achieve. You know, keep the child in the centre of it and try and leave emotion to one side, obviously, because what you are talking about is quite emotional. But, you know, go in there and say, look, you know, sit down, have a proper conversation about it. I think there's sometimes a tendency for some parents to think that, you know, an easy or lazy option is being adopted. You know, and I kind of see that on social media quite a lot. And I think sometimes, you know, you just have to think that maybe somebody hasn't quite clocked what you've seen, and, you know, just sort of relaying that bit of information to them might make them go, oh really? Okay, I'm not seeing that, you know. I think just being open and keeping that dialogue going with you and the, you know, other people involved in your child's development.
There's also another thing in terms of the schools, in terms of children's behaviour in school is often very, very different to their behaviour out of school. And so when we were doing our transition plan, when we've done our EPACs, the sorts of things that, and the Thrive assessment, the sorts of things that we as parents were identifying as being issues from a home point of view, when it's quite embarrassing, because you feel a little bit like you don't know your child. But the teacher's comparison and assessment was completely different. So, like, you know, one of the questions would be something like, does your child experience anxiety? So we would put yes, quite a lot. Teacher would say, nah, never see that. Does your child have outbursts? Oh yeah, a lot. Yeah,
like 3 a day. Runs out the room, squeals, cries, chuck things across the room.
And the teacher says, no, never seen anything like that. And that happens through the whole assessment. And so you basically come out of it thinking, you know, so what are we doing wrong as parents that means we're getting that behaviour at school but they're not getting it at home? And actually, again, you've got to go all the way back to your training stuff, that actually they hold it together at school, and that's why the behaviour looks very different. And you are the safe space, you're the people that they're going to come to, and that's why you get it all. You know, they're exhausted from holding all that emotion in. So again, sometimes that you have to continue to have that sort of...
You have to turn it around, and you have to go, the fact that my son is having a tantrum on the floor means that he's completely comfortable to do that in front of me. And that's a really really bizarre thing to, you know, kind of, you know, sort of say to yourself. But at the end of the day, that's, you know, that's 100%, you know, you don't, 100% the case, you know, you never rude to anybody you don't know generally. You only rude to people that you really kind of know and care about, and maybe snap at them and that sort of thing. And that's the same for kids, you know.
Yeah. There
was a stage where Riley, we would pick him up and he would just get halfway along and he'd just, I don't know, trip up the curb and the world would collapse, you know. And 9 times out of 10 that would be a problem. But I think, as Sophie said, it's just because he's been, you know, holding himself together at school, and then he's just, you know, he's tired and just wants to let you know he's been on good form all day. And yeah.
There's you know, I read in one of the sort of on forums or whatever, but you know, there's a really good analogy about, you know, you go to work and you hold it all in. You know, you don't swear, scream, shout, kick, you know, do anything bad to your employer. What you do is you save it till you walk in the front door. You know, you slam the front door, you go, oh my God, I've had the most terrible day at work, blah, blah, blah. And it all comes out there. And I think that's exactly the same for your kids when they've held it in at school all day. So, you know, yeah. So, yeah, there is that real difference between home behaviour and school behaviour, potentially, not for everybody.
Yeah. And what was interesting was Sophie went to pick up Riley one day, and something happened in the classroom, and he let loose, and he had an almighty strike and ran out. And his teacher at the time went, "Wow, I've never seen that. Oh, I understand what you mean." And at that point, we thought, "Thank God she's actually seen it," because she'd never seen him lose his temper ever. But I think stood back and went, "Oh yeah, I see exactly what you mean now." And we had a home meeting, and she actually, you know, told us that story about how she'd seen it, and was like, yeah, I totally get it now, but we just don't see it, you know. So yeah. When you adopt a child, you're not just adopting that child, you are potentially also adopting a whole different family. Our son has a half sibling and a full sibling, and although we tried really, really hard to maintain contact with his half-sibling, that child's adopted parents, for whatever reason, we don't know what reason, they decided they didn't want to maintain contact anymore, and they haven't replied to letters. We used to meet once a year at Christmas, so that they would maintain contact. So that contact has gone, and we don't know why. But his full sibling, his adoptive parents came to visit us. A really, really great relationship. We have family days out with them. We meet just with the kids and us and the mums. You know, it's just really, really positive. They have a birth child as well, who's a similar kind of age gap to our children. And so, you know, there's just a really good sort of support network, but also a brilliant opportunity for the kids to know each other as part of each other's lives growing up. There's nothing weird about it. There's nothing difficult about it. You know, it's just like an extension of our family. And I think that's something for people to bear in mind, that, you know, it isn't just that child. You know, your child may come from a family where they might go on to have more children, and you may be contacted and asked whether you want to take on a further child, which is what happened to us, and we turned it down after a lot of, well, I say a lot of thought. We were given a bank holiday weekend to think about it. Is that what it was?
Yes. Right. But as it turned out, it worked out way better.
I remember it was quite a hard thing to make a decision on it.
It has worked out for the best, because we wouldn't have been able to spread ourselves thin enough to give both children what they would have needed. And actually knowing that, you know, that the child has ended up with the family that they have, that's, you know, it's brilliant. And it's not an issue, and, you know,
it was perfect for them, and it worked out well for both the kids as well. And I strongly recommend that you keep the siblings, you know, communicating, because again, I'm waiting for the question of, you know, why doesn't my brother live with me and things like that, but we haven't had it yet. But, you know, Riley knows.
I'm not sure we will get it, because this is just quite normal. There's no, there's no secrets. We talk about the brother that he doesn't see anymore, and we say, we don't know why you don't see them, but we've got photos, and, they pop up on our digital photo frame or whatever. Yeah. There's a half brother, and those kinds of things. And equally with the foster family as well, we still have contact with our son's foster carer. It's just part of our normal narrative. It's not unusual, it's not secret. And they're just more people, extra birthday cards, extra Christmas cards, it's just quite nice. Be open about it, talk about it, connect with whatever other siblings and things may be going on as is appropriate in terms of your adoption plan. But yeah.
I think during the stages of that person's life up, you weren't with us day one, you came to us here, but you were with that person then. And let them know, so they know everything, so they know their history basically, because I think that's one of the things they teach you is don't try and erase bits of someone's history, even if it's traumatic. They're still going to need to know that something happened in that part of their life. They can't just forget about it and erase it. Join the dots up and make so they know that they know where they come from.
And we have a memory box that's got all sorts of bits and pieces in it. So when he was in hospital just after he'd been born, the hospital provided like little knitted boots and things like that. And his birth mother, I think probably, had bought him a little pair of shoes. So we've got those in the box upstairs. Our foster carer was really helpful. So we've got like a little lock of hair and a video from when he was a baby. And she took loads and loads of photos and gave us a photo album. She'd had a teddy bear made out of his baby grows from when he was born and those kinds of things. So we keep all of that. All of that's on display. And the photos that we've got from when he was a baby start from the point at which her album finished. Half the album was empty. So we've just carried it on. There's no sort of separation of sort of segments of his life. It is his life and his history, and it's about us fitting into that and becoming part of that, rather than trying to pretend that stuff didn't happen, really.